with the use of AI by immigration practitioners trying to get clients. That is something I've never seen Next League ever do because students' education are important. It's a supreme value to me. I want students to be successful. I'm a lifelong learner. And I look at yourself, I even make recommendations when I see something. I have never seen anything that raised my concern of potential fraud. But doing ethical and doing things the right way is very, very important. And Next League does that very, very well. But I can tell you what, you can get a better value by doing what Ranjeet does at the Next League program.
Hi, Thomas. How are you today?
I am well, Ranjeet, and thank you for having me.
Wonderful, and thank you for sparing your time for us. There have been a lot of questions, Thomas. People have been coming to us and asking us about EB-1A, especially in the 2026 adjudication era. Let's jump here. What's changed about the USCIS reviews on EB-1A cases in 2026?
The changes took place with the whole petition type process back in 2025. The biggest change I see how USCIS views EB-1A cases in 2026 is the continual progress of the heightened level of scrutiny that they are now putting into any application. Immigration service officers are being trained to ask additional credibility questions of EBA applicants that raises the level of preponderance. Depending on the president, who is known to change his mind in a heartbeat, can have a profound effect on immigration policy, including EB-1A. This is where anxiety resides in EB-1 applicants. This is because immigration service officers are now being directed to review immigration with a higher scrutiny and a new line of questioning that differs greatly from the past, and they're not so quick to give the benefit of the doubt regarding an EB-1A petition narrative. Immigration service officers can further question any or all EB-1A petition category requirements, such as critical roles, remuneration, membership qualifications, judging others' work, or even written work. In short, they can split hairs on an application. The preponderance 1% margin above 50 cents of acceptance is a bigger difference maker than before. That's why it's better to apply now and do not wait for USCIS and the current administration to make any more policy changes, such as immigrants have returning home to their home country to apply for green card status. If this happens, you may not make it back.
I understand. It's a very important input. Rather than waiting for something to change, it's always good to do it now if your profile is ready.
What's going on with this current administration, the president, USCIS, Department of Homeland Security, creates a lot of fear in people. And with fear comes anxiety, with fear can come depression, anger, things that act as deterrents from people to filing. Because now they're going to say, well, I'm automatically going to get turned down because of this stuff, without realizing that they have built a whole future on their education, came to the United States to be in the top of their field, and they're letting themselves get paralyzed by what they hear in the news instead of taking action and getting it in now before policy changes and it gets worse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you talk about fear, let's talk about the biggest fear for EB-1A applicants is RFE or annoyed act. From an officer's perspective, what is number one reason that you have seen as an adjudicator the candidates get RFEs and even after meeting 3+ criteria?
Well, with all the changes going on, Number one reason candidates get RFE is the officers are going through a bunch of changes themselves. They get these new policies and they have to try to manage and learn this stuff, a new line of questioning, how long it's supposed to take. This slows down the whole process of EB-1A. And in doing so, they start looking at new applications or new petitions, and they start incorporating the new learned policies and how to apply it. And therefore, by asking one additional question and saying, well, why is this a critical role? Instead of saying, he does this, this, and this, or why is his remuneration not qualified? Or they're asking that additional question from what they look up, what they research on themselves, the officers research on themselves, whether they're using the Department of Labor's occupational statistics, the online database, or somewhere else. They're getting information and say, well, this is what maybe his position is. And it says that, well, this is a higher remuneration and what he's currently making is not above and beyond that, and therefore not qualified, where they could have the wrong job classification. That does happen. But when they get the right one, it can still be the same pay scale. But what makes it different? And there was something I saw today from one of my former colleagues at USCIS about the breadth of criteria versus being really extraordinary in a couple of them that are ultra high level. And according from what I read from my colleague today on LinkedIn was that the judges are saying, well, they may be way overqualified in these categories and they're the top 10% of their field. And do they necessarily have to qualify for the other ones? Because the extraordinary ability is so overwhelming that why aren't these people passing? Because they don't have, let's say, the remuneration or the number of articles out there, or they're not judging contests because they're so in deep into what they're doing that makes them that top of that field. So it's kind of interesting thing my colleague had to say, who was a policy analyst with USCIS, and know it's changing. The courts are having a different view from what we're led to be by the administration.
Absolutely. Now, how do you distinguish between authentic achievement and manufactured achievements? And what are the red flags?
USCIS are well schooled in understanding research and researching evidence. Every document submitted with an immigration petition, whether a bank statement, tax documents, resume, pictures, court documents, employee records, academic and credentials, are thoroughly vetted for accuracy and subject to cross-agency scrutiny as well. If an immigration service officer has a question about, let's say, past court dealing or something that was flagged for by DOS on a visa, they can go and contact those agencies for further assistance. Me personally, I have come across quite a few red flags and submitted my supervisor for review or went it directly to the fraud department. So immigration officers may be using AI during the review of petitions when it comes to AI generated content, and they have to break it down by components listed in the narrative, which is really important. USCIS has been around since 1891, or a derivative. Acquired knowledge over time is a value asset in detecting fraud and other related crimes within the immigration services in the private sector. There's also unethical people out there that have been played by USCIS, and this stuff is all turned over to fraud specialists who will take the case over and start investigating it. And this is the deep investigation, right? So the red flags are easy to pick out, even with the use of AI by immigration practitioners trying to get clients. That is something I've never seen Next League ever do. I look at yourself, I even make recommendations when I see something. I have never seen anything that raised my concern of potential fraud.
Absolutely. Thank you very
And
much.
this is a big difference to a lot of people compared to a lot of attorneys or immigration services. Everyone's battling for money, but doing ethical and doing things the right way is very, very important. And Nextly does that very, very well.
Yes, ethics is our cornerstone and the foundation pillar of the way we do businesses. And that's very important for us. Now, we are getting a lot of question actually for EB-1A is that if someone hasn't published papers, won any major awards, done any judging yet, can they still build a case for EB-1A or are they too late in their life?
Absolutely. The thing is, you got to start doing this at some point in time, regardless if you have anything now. You're going to have to start doing this because this is your profession. This is what USCIS wants. This is federal government wants is not only viable candidates, but people who are going to be take a proactive approach to being part of the community. If you can show an immigration officer that you are continuing to learn and continuing to try to reach new levels in your expertise, they're going to notice that. But if you're just in an EB-1A and you haven't won publish a paper or you haven't won major award, but if you're not entering, let's say, a contest to win a major award, you can show that you're submitting your work to these major awards, whatever they are. You can show that you're making that effort to be that EB-1A candidate. And why? Not everybody is applying for these things. It's tough competition out there. But if you're not willing to get out there and start being part of that community, start publishing papers, try to be a judge in a contest, there's one exception to some of this stuff if you haven't done it, and that's if you are in the middle of cutting edge technology or scientific discoveries, or you all of a sudden had a song and it became a worldwide hit, or you're the next generation athlete, right? They know that these people are out there. And they may have only done it once, but what they did was made them a superstar in their field. They understand that there are people that can do these things, that have exceptional ability, and that's what qualifies them. They can get away without, let's say, publishing a paper because they wrote a real cool song, or and then maybe done longer on a TV show that is judging talent. Well, same thing with in the technology field. I made a reference to somewhere recently that if you got a startup and you came up with a new way of identifying copyright images and prevents TikTok scammers from using those images, well, that's like a huge thing in the whole world. Then you're stopping what? False news. If you could do something like that, of course, that's going to get the attention of everybody in the world, and USCIS is going to identify that and say, hey, he's got something that someone hasn't done before. We need this guy here. Because stuff like that is a big deal in our country.
Absolutely. That's very helpful. What role do recommendation letters play in one's final merit decision, and what makes a letter persuasive versus generic?
This question is a very, very good question. And I think a lot of time when we ask for someone to write a recommendation letter, we're not asking the right question. And the question is asking your director or manager or CEO, why did you hire me? Because in that question, they will start compiling in a letter why you are a difference maker and why your role is so critical to that organization and what you do and how you're making the company money, or since you started working there, you haven't accrued any penalties levied by the federal government for substandard IT work or security breaches, these types of things. Why did you hire me? And what have I done to help you grow your organization? And make you sleep better at night knowing that your investment is well worth paid for. And they can go into details on what you do. One of the biggest things that most of these people that I've seen come through the school is there are employees that are constantly monitoring for compliance. That's an important role, which means they are following federal government agencies to see what they may be planning in changing IT or cybersecurity and stuff like that. This is the stuff you want in recommendation letters, because this is what makes it compelling. You want to just pull them in and say, without this guy, we may be out of business almost, or we'd be in news in some Yahoo IT as a company that has security issues. If they're keeping you out of the mainstream news because they're doing what they're hired to do, keep your website, your information secure. That is the biggest thing. That's what they hired you for. And that is a critical role. That's the biggest thing. And I've listed some questions that I've submitted to you, Ranjeet. They can be reviewed, and these are questions that are perfectly safe to ask a CEO, manager, or director. They have a lot on their agenda, so you just ask them to write a recommendation letter. You may get, well, he does this really well, he does this really well, without explaining what you actually did, or what federal agencies you work for, or governing agencies, what state agencies or local agencies. They just may write a letter. And it may be a well-written letter, but if it doesn't say why they're giving you this letter of recommendation and what a benefit you are to the company, it's just an opinion.
Absolutely. Now, we see a lot of candidates getting denied after spending 20,000, 30,000 on attorneys and other consultants. What is the difference between a strong case preparation and just a good paperwork? And also in terms of citing case laws, citing legal arguments.
I'm glad you asked that, because I had a case like that last year. I did an RFE work for a client, and Murad had retained a high-priced New York City immigration firm, and his appointed attorney listed his job title as business manager on his EB-1A petition. USCIS turned a 12-page RFE to him, and that he only met like 1 out of 10 EB-1A categories. So Murat was confused when he received it, and by profession, he is a sports announcer, a talk show host, and he creates televised celebrity events. His attorney drafted a 12,000-page response to USCIS citing precedents, misrepresentation. About 10 days before he had to submit the RFE, he had contacted me and asked me to review his documents. And then I went through it. The first thing I know is it says you're only a business manager. And I said, a business manager of what? What do you manage? And he's telling me all these different things. And then he sends me the letter from his expert witness that his high-priced New York City attorney got, and this was an associate dean from the business school at Rutgers. And he said he's a business manager in media, sports, and entertainment. And I said, that's exactly what you do. That's what your title needs to be. Have your attorney go in and install that you're a business manager of media, sports, and entertainment. It was tied to every category that got denied on his original position. Everything that was listed on that 12-page RFE. His attorney to update it, and then they submitted a response. 2 weeks later, he contacted me. He was ecstatic. He got approved.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
That 3 letters, media, sports, and entertainment, that was not on his petition, almost cost him in his EB-1A.
Understood.
But it tied everything else together, connected the dots. 2 weeks, RFE over and done with. This is why we go back to this question. Are these high-priced attorneys necessary? He paid them probably upward towards $50,000, $100,000 to do this and then write a 12-page RFE, which probably cost him another 20 grand. And then he comes to me 2 weeks later, he's got an approved EB-1A because we changed 3 words. This is about writing to the audience, not writing your legal ego. Attorneys have a bad time of it because when they're confronted with an RFE, the first thing they want to do is sound off their legal knowledge like they're talking to another attorney or a judge, or maybe just trying to intimidate the immigration officers who are trained to just to answer the RFE questions. High-priced attorneys aren't necessarily the solution. They're more likely to be the problem. If you have money to spend, go spend it. But I can tell you what, you can get a better value by doing what Ranjeet does at the Next League program. Because I get to see all this stuff and I can let them know. I look at the documents, I know what's there, and I can see if there's a problem or a question that we can get answered before it gets submitted. And we can simplify. We have a process where it's almost like writing a mini book that lists everything in a certain order, followed by the evidence, and then any appendices. I got maybe a table of contents and an index that cross-references where everything is. It's easy for a person to sit at their desk and read. And that's what an immigration service officer does, is they read really well, and that's how they adjudicate.
That's wonderful and very heartening to know the positive side of it. Actually, just a jumbled up of pages, the verbosity does not really help. That's really very helpful for us to know. Now, earlier you mentioned, Thomas, about emerging fields and new cutting edge technology. How much weight does USCIS give in extraordinary ability in emerging field like AI, deep tech versus traditional fields?
Emerging technologies are happening every day, whether it's AI, deep tech, and you compare it to traditional academia. And traditional academia, where you get a breakthrough and then you got to write a paper on it and you got to submit it to a journal and then you got to get some reviews to see if everybody agrees whether this is a good thing or not. USCIS is keenly aware of emerging fields. I'm going to go back to some great people in this world. Does anyone know who Wernher von Braun is? He is a classic example of evolving technology that put man in space, on the moon, and pretty soon will probably be on Mars, right? He was a rocket scientist that U.S. when pulled in after World War II from Germany. But you're also talking people like who are other great examples are like Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla. They were great knowledge people on cutting edge technology, where had they waited for academia approval, they may not have been able to create the technology that changes the world. You see, Wernher von Braun became part of NASA. Matter of fact, he was the face of NASA. When the federal government discovers someone with extraordinary abilities and emerging technology, they're quick to grab. They want these people here. And then they can make that person who they are. And they don't need academia to approval to do it. And this is a really good question because you can go back in U.S. history and see how many times they pulled people from other countries because of it. And they will actively recruit people. I know my friend John lives in Florida, who is from Australia, and he was recruited by the United States Air Force to come here. All right? Because him and his whole family worked in the air laboratories across the country because what they knew in a specific field. I cannot say, but I can tell you it was ended up being the one of the acting deputy secretary of special forces because of his knowledge in that field. It was a great accomplishment.
Yes. Now, coming back to basic, I just get down that if unfortunately somebody's EB-1A has got denied, or let us say he's got annoyed, what would make you approve the same profile on a refiling case? What has to change?
Everything.
Mhm.
If you're using the same profile that you went in the first time and it got denied, it's more than likely that same profile is going to get denied again. Everything has to change. And that's a good thing because if you review why you got denied, you can create a profile so you don't get denied. Most of the time, a denial is caused by a lack of clarity, document organization, formatting, or simply not answering the questions. Right? The denial is a result of 3 or sometimes 4 different reviews by officers before getting denied. You're not only going to do the initial review, they may do an RFE. You may answer some of the stuff and then they may issue another RFE to get more clarification. And if you're still not getting it done, then you're going to get annoyed. If you go in with that same profile, you're repeating what you did last. You have to change the way you approach it, everything from the way your documents are formatted, maybe even who you're working with on such an endeavor for your petition on a refile. And I'll let you, Ranjeet, see some questionable, intangible, irrelevant, or I find new things. I don't know how many other organizations employ a former immigration service officer to help make their organization better. Next League does. That's why they want me to review it. This isn't just because I'm going to be an expert. No, I want to make sure that they're doing it the right way because students' education are important. It's a supreme value to me. I want students to be successful. I'm a lifelong learner. My parents were lifelong learners. I'm a student of life and I want to go, when it's my time, I want to go to the grave that way. Therefore, change everything. The formatting, the questions, the layout. Rethink about how you're answering questions. Make sure you're qualified for the criterias. If you're not qualified for the criteria, how do you get qualified for criteria? You have to rethink your whole approach on a refile. If you go in thinking the same way, that profile is more than likely going to get rejected.
Understood. Now, what's your honest assessment on EB-1A timeline right now, or is premium processing worth it? What should the candidates expect?
Okay, this is a very good question. And we touched on some of this earlier. The EB-1A timeline, along with other immigration timelines, has several contributing factors, one of which is predicated on Department of State visa bulletins. The EB-1A candidates fall under the DOS employment-based preference category 2, has a certain filing date and the final action date, and these dates vary from country to country. USCIS processing time depend on caseload and policy implementation. USCIS can't do anything about what DOS does, Department of State does, right, on their visa bulletin, but they have a lot of control of other things. And with this current administration, and in the last, since the president took office, we have seen a plethora of changes in EB-1A policy and immigration policy. When USCIS gets a new policy, they're required to make policy changes which require training officers to implement them into their adjudication duties and processes. Training officers' workflow updates create a slowdown in the process. All these changes affect processing time and date range windows. And I think the current EB-1A window is 8 to 20 months. which is longer than the normal processing range of what they think they said was 6 to 12 months. In my honest assessment, 20-month processing time is exactly where it needs to be, given all the changes that they've been implementing since fall or winter of 2025. The important thing to keep in mind is that when the administration makes changes in policy, it takes time for USCIS to get up to speed and fully operational on it. You're looking at the low end of a range of 2 months and the high end of a range 8 months.
I got it.
The implementation time is where it needs to be. Now, as for the premium processing, if you are eligible under the country status on the DOS visa bulletin, you have an approved date, I suggest doing the premium processing. The simple reason is the current administration has proven to be very unpredictable when making decisions. This is especially true for immigration process. We see it all the time with ICE and CBP, Custom Border Patrol. And at any moment, it changes, it affects candidate status. Without regard of your EB-1A or family-based, it doesn't matter. They make the changes, they don't care who's there. This is what we want and this is what we're going to do. That's the bottom line. And this is the biggest fear, is the current administrator making these changes on green card filing. When they came out last year with that candidates had to return to their home or country of origin to file for their green card, that sent a lot of people off the charts. It would have sent me off the charts. The worst thing is just thinking about returning to your country to file your green card application, and then you try to get back and you're denied entry, and you can't return to the job. USCIS has said if you're in the US, you can apply for your green card here. If you're sitting on this because you're caught by fear, you are putting yourself at risk. Maybe a policy change and then USCIS has to say, go back to your country.
I got it.
EB-1A applicants of all the other categories have put more time, money, and energy into their education and career to earn a living that they dreamed of. You have more at risk by letting fear paralyze you into non-action than taking a proactive approach before policy changes again.
I got it.
I'm serious. If it was me, this is what I'd be doing. I'm not going to wait around for them to make decisions for me. I'm going to make my decision now, because once that's in, they're still subject to the previous policy.
Wonderful. Now, Thomas, from your experience, adjudication as a USCIS officer for EB-1A cases, what's the biggest mistake self-preparers made than people who go for coach candidate like from next league avoids, according to your understanding?
The bad thing about self-preparers is their ego. They think they're smart enough to do an EB-1A petition themselves. And I think like 90% of them fail in some fashion, and then they have to go get an attorney organization or school or someone like me to help them fix their problems. And these are people with their master's, doctorates, PhD, and whatever subject matter qualifies them as an expert. I mentioned my client, and he came to me about a week before his RFE was due. I was very fortunate to find a simple solution and make recommendations. That's not always so with a self-preparer who waits to the last week and then piles a bunch of documents on someone in the field, whether it's a former immigration service officer, immigration service, or a school, and you have to go sort through all these things and try to make heads and tails and then put together a finished piece of work. It's just incredibly challenging. I want to go back to the New York City attorney who wrote this legal formatted RFE document as if he was talking to another attorney or a courtroom judge. A lot of times, self-preparers prepare these documents in a similar fashion. They use what they know to do it, and then a USCIS officer gets to take a look at it, and they're just like, what is this? USCIS has explicit definitions for each EB-1A criteria. Problem Eagle gives is that a self-preparer will think he's qualified for all of them, and he could be qualified for none of them. Let's take the published works category. Writing an op-ed in a local newspaper is not published at the level USCIS wants. Writing a research paper to an academic journal explaining how your new AI reconfiguration imaging programming prevents scammers from using copyright photos in fake news stories on TikTok is very relevant. That is a published work. It's noted. This is why I work with Next Lead program. I know Ranjeet is pretty keen on this stuff. He is really making sure that his students understand what each criteria is and what the most important thing is. I have an undergrad degree in English, professional and technical writing. The immigration narratives I've received from the Next League program are forwarded in the fashion that any immigration officer can clearly read and follow. They can get through it, approve it, and move on to the next one. Officers don't spend time chasing and trying to figure out improperly formatted and unclear narratives. They don't. If they have to go toggle back and forth, they're wasting time. They have a number of cases they have to get through in a day. And if they fall behind, they're going to get questioned. They're not going to sit there. If it's unclear, they're going to write an RFE. And that's the biggest thing that you get with self-preparers.
Absolutely. I think that's very valid. Guys, what Thomas is saying is very clear. The gap isn't about intelligence, it's about your positioning. You can have PhD, you can have dozen publications, you have international recognition and still lose because of your narrative. Doesn't match because it doesn't match the USCIS what it is looking for. The officer reading your petition doesn't care about the legal details. I think this is what the takeaway has been. They care about a clear story that connects your evidence to the criteria. Now, this is where most self-preparers who aspire for EB-1A get stuck up. Not because they are not qualified, but because they are writing for the wrong audience, perhaps. That's what it is there. So, Thomas, I may like to request you one thing. There are a lot of students who are our audience today or otherwise want their profile to be assessed by Next League or by you or by any attorneys and they feel confused and struck up. From an adjudicator perspective, would you be open to review some of the select students and Next League would be pleased to facilitate that interaction between people who are our audience and yourself?
Absolutely. Education, like I said, is a supreme value. I will liken it that if it's technology written and you're sending it to me, who is not technology savvy,
Absolutely.
what's the answer going to be? You got to know who your audience is. Immigration service officers come from a variety of different backgrounds. All they need is a high school education and show that the wherewithal for adjudication, being a good judge of what people are writing on paper and how they're telling their story. They're not doctors. They're not lawyers. Maybe some of them are, but they're just very intelligent people that know how to work their way around reading documents and finding truth and false.
Absolutely. And guys, if you are serious about your EB-1A but haven't had any expert to look at your case, or don't guess, the cost of getting a narrative wrong is an RFE or a denial at worst. We are going to create a link for you where to get a 15 to 20-minute profile review with Thomas. Bring your CV, your best accomplishments and your questions. And during your one-on-one interaction with Thomas, He will map your background against the actual EB-1A criteria, not the interpretation of it. Spot the narrative gaps that are causing your points. Show you exactly what extraordinary ability means to USCIS and not your ego. I think this word has been used a lot today, so it's very important for us to realize and give you a clear map. Do it yourself with confidence or work with us to be successful first time. And you will walk away with knowing whether your petition is strong, weak, or just poorly positioned. So you will be able to schedule your 15 to 20-minute review with Thomas now by clicking a booking link below. Just to make sure that we get only serious applicant, there may be a small token fee so just be prepared for that as well. Will be a really small token fee, not a huge amount, because this is out of passion. We are trying to do this and to get the best for you in this particular case. Thank you, Thomas, for your help for this particular case. And now the last question for the day that we are getting here is, how is USCIS using AI and machine learning to review evidence in EB-1A petitions, and what does this mean for preparation?
USCIS has been using AI and machine learning since the end of 2025. But that is only for preparing your EB-1A package or any immigration package when it comes in and aligning it in a certain order so immigration officers can read it in a nice workflow manner. When they come in, whether it's a manual or electronic, it is sent to an AI program that will scan, review it, and say, well, all right, this is an I-140 employment-based application. And then it goes through the whole package, and it will identify the different forms attached. Let's say you're working with Ranjeet or an attorney. There has to be a G28 saying that you have representation. There's got to be an I-765 attached to that as well. All it's doing is taking a big pile of documents and putting them in a certain order so that they can read who your representation is, your I-140. Then you may get some images of your, let's say, driver's license or your credentials or whatever it may be. It's going to have a list of all that. The I-140 takes precedent before the actual information on the EB-1A. That has to qualify first before it gets into EB-1A. This is what the machine learning tag solution is. That's all it does. EB-1A is not used in any shape or form in the decision-making process, nor does it influence the decision-making process. And this is confirmed because all it's doing is organizing it for the officer, and it saves an incredible amount of time. And so it makes it a lot more efficient. And then the one thing it does is the information you put on there, they will use the AI to match Social Security numbers, identification, and everything like that. And this is part of the fraud detection and vetting process. There is no plans right now for AI to be an active part of the decision-making process.
Understood. We have one bonus question also. Repeated people have been asking us this particular question, that how should an applicant think about the profile when they are in a high urgency situation, job loss threat, dependent visa status, etc. Does urgency matter?
When anyone is confronted with a high urgency situation, there's a lot of emotions that a person's go through. They're like drivers in programming. Let's say printers, you need to update your drivers and stuff like that. We all have priorities and drivers in our life, like maybe your family. Your work is a big driver because that's your source of income. Depending upon how you prioritize life, what is important will decide how you proceed. And if something just drops on you, the first thing that hits your emotions is fear. And then you're caught in this situation where you got a lot of anxiety going on and you're trying to make decisions on which way to go. You're overwhelmed with the thought process and how to handle everything and in what order. The thing I will say before making irrational emotional decisions, call someone. If you lose your job and now you're worried about your enrollment or your submitting or not filing, can have irreversible consequences. The thing to do is that if you're in a panic state of mind, is to get yourself calmed down. Everyone worked very hard. I did. I know I did. I had to bust my ass to be an immigration service officer. I went through my undergrad and I got my master's degree in public administration and policy. Ranjeet probably has 20 letters and initials after his name about his background. Tells you how much hard work you put into it. Realize that you put in the hard work. And sometimes if we have time, we can put it on the back burner for a little bit, but we can't just leave it sit there. We have to come back to it and complete our dream, our story. You're here for a reason because you have extraordinary abilities. Don't ever forget that and don't ever leave that untouched. Don't go away from it. That's who you are.
Wonderful. Now, this has been really very enlightening and illuminating, I would say that, Thomas. And thank you very much for your time today. And this is going to be very useful for all the audience who are listening to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ranjeet. Glad to be here.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any further questions or need personalized guidance, please reach out to us. We are here to help you every step of the way in your journey towards achieving your American dream. Let's connect and make it happen together.